Power rises and falls across the galaxy, but what happens when that power means nothing to the one holding the gun? The answer is a different kind of legend, a figure who walks through Jedi and Sith conflict without ever choosing a side while the galaxy dreams of heroes and fears its villains. There are others who move in the quiet places, in the forgotten corridors of starships and the dim corners of cantinas. They do not seek thrones or temples. They do not chase destiny. They simply take the job. The story of Star Wars is usually told in absolutes. The noble Jedi, serving the light side of the Force. The ruthless Sith, embracing the dark side empires. Rising republics, collapsing wars that would shape entire eras. Yet, in the spaces between those grand battles, there is another tradition. One measured not in prophecy, but in credits, in contracts signed in backrooms, and honored with blaster fire. Some beings are not driven by faith or fury, but by something colder and simpler. The work, the payout, the clean escape. Around the time the Clone Wars consumed the galactic core, the Jedi debated ethics and attachment. The Sith plotted domination and revenge. But in the shadows, a Duros gunslinger walked past their arguments untouched by any of it. This was a being who did not care which banner flew over Coruscant, or who sat on the throne of any empire. What mattered was who could afford his fee, and whether the target still drew breath when the job was done over time. That indifference became its own terrible consistency. This is Cad Bane, a Duros from the world of Duro, a bounty hunter trained in part under Jango Fett, learning armor tactics, precision shooting, and the brutal math of risk and reward. While Jedi meditated on the will of the Force and Sith drowned themselves in the dark side, Cad Bane refined something far simpler. He became the one hired when no one else was bold enough to accept the contract infiltrating the Jedi Temple itself to steal a Holocron kidnapping Force-sensitive children. For Darth Sidious, holding the Galactic Senate hostage on Coruscant and walking away calm every time for years as the Clone Wars raged and later as new regimes rose from the ashes, Cad Bane remained almost unchanged. The hat, the coat, the breathing tubes, the unhurried draw a constant presence in a galaxy that never stopped tearing itself apart. While Jedi and Sith argued over morality and fate, he measured every situation in meters and seconds, in distance to cover and size of payout. What followed was a career that cut across eras, from clashes with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker to a cold, enduring feud with Boba Fett. This is the story of Cad Bane told slowly, from obscure beginnings in the underworld to an aging gunslinger facing his final showdown. It is meant to be heard in the dark eyes closed as blaster fire and distant wars fade into background noise. For the next 1,000 years, the galaxy will remember its great battles, but tonight the focus is a single, quiet figure walking through them all, unbothered, untouched, and utterly unconcerned, framing a life. With no allegiance to understand that figure, the story of Cad Bane has to be framed correctly. This is not a tale of temptation and return, no rise to power followed by tragic fall. There is no arc of redemption, no final moment of conscience. Instead, his life runs as a straight, unbroken line, a flat reading on the moral sensor from first job to final breath. He begins with no fucks to give, and ends the same way most figures in galactic history bend under the weight of war and ideology. Jedi turn into Sith, idealists become tyrants, loyal soldiers break under orders that go too far. The question is, what happens when someone never bends at all? The answer is Cad Bane, a Duros from the world of Duro, who treats the Force, the Republic, the Empire, and every creed in between as background noise to a contract. For this reason, his life is best told as a calm chronology, not a drama of inner conflict, but a ledger of completed assignments. The structure that follows is simple, era by era, job by job, through the late Republic, into the Clone Wars, across the rise of the Empire, and out into the scattered frontier of the New Republic. What followed was not a journey toward meaning, but a steady accumulation of paydays and bodies in the shadows of the post-High Republic underworld. He learns the trade mentored by Jango Fett, the Mandalorian, whose own ruthless efficiency would shape an entire generation of bounty hunters over time. Bane absorbs every lesson, Armor tactics, misdirection, and most importantly, detachment. The client's politics do not matter. The target's pleas do not matter, only the terms of the deal matter. This is where the flat line begins during the Clone Wars. That line cuts straight through the heart of major events, while Jedi and Sith clash over the fate of the Republic. Bane calmly infiltrates the Jedi Temple to steal a holocron of Force-sensitive children, then kidnaps those children for Darth Sidious. Himself, he holds the Senate hostage for the Hutt's breaks, prisoners from Republic facilitaries, and walks through corridors filled with clones and senators as if they are scenery, not participants in a grand struggle. Through each era, he intersects with familiar faces: Obi-Wan Kenobi trading disguises and blaster fire in cramped starship halls, Anakin Skywalker snarling across ruined battlefields, Ahsoka, Tano facing him in tense standoffs where the light side meets something colder than the dark Boba Fett, shifting from resentful child to armored rival on Tatooine. Every encounter reveals another angle of his indifference. Their destinies change, his does not. As regimes fall and empires rise, the timeline will move forward calmly. The narration will linger on details: the dust in a cantina on Nal Hutta, the humming lights of a Republic prison block, the dry wind over Freetown during his final duel. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. Never comes because mercy is never part of the equation. Ahead is only a long, quiet walk through changing governments until at last even Cad Bane's flat line reaches its end. From Duro's skies to the underworld's shadows, in a galaxy obsessed with destiny, there are still those who treat the ages as nothing more than changing backdrops for the same old job. Power rises, empires fall, the Force surges between dark and light, and one Duros gunslinger simply adjusts his hat and books the next passage off-world. The story of Cad Bane begins long before his first showdown with a Jedi on the polluted world of Duro. For thousands of years, the Duros were among the galaxy's earliest hyperspace pioneers, mapping trade routes, founding colonies, and vanishing into the stars with an ease that would shape galactic history. Their pale red eyes adapted to dim shipboard corridors, their long faces framed by rebreathers and flight goggles. They became creatures of transit more than of soil. On orbital cities drifting above their poisoned homeworld, young Duros grew up staring through transparasteel at departing freighters and learning that any system could be home as long as the course was plotted and the credits were good. Out of that culture stepped Cad Bane. By the late prequel era, in the years just before 32 BBY, he was already a name traded in hushed tones in the underworld, mentored by Jango Fett and drilled in a brutal, business-first code. Around the time that Jedi uncovered the clone army on Kamino, Bane was already moving through Hutt space, Coruscant's lower levels, and the lawless Outer Rim, taking contracts that respectable guilds refused. What followed was not an origin of trauma or revelation, but a steady refinement of a profession. From the opening shots of the Clone Wars through their final embers, Cad Bane's timeline runs parallel to the grand narratives usually told. While the Republic crumbled and the Sith orchestrated galactic war from the shadows, Bane infiltrated the Jedi Temple to steal a holocron, kidnapped Force-sensitive children for Darth Sidious, and held the Galactic Senate hostage to free Ziro the Hutt. The history of this era is often framed as a duel between light side and dark side, yet in the ventilation shafts above those duels and in the alleys behind those Senate chambers walked the contractors who made impossible plans practical. In that hidden machinery of conflict, bounty hunters functioned as quiet instruments of policy. Need a senator removed without a trace, a separatist leader extracted, a Jedi distracted while the Sith moved a piece on the board. The answer, again and again, was a name in a data file and a Duros in a wide-brimmed hat. Over time, Cad Bane became the template for this role, an apex predator in a food chain most citizens never saw, doing for credits what entire armies failed to accomplish for ideology. Where Sith are consumed by passion and the Jedi by duty, Cad Bane's defining power is his refusal to care. No creed, no cause, no faith in any empire. In an age of screaming emotions and prophetic visions, his apathy becomes its own form of stability. an unyielding constant from the last days of the Republic through the rise of the Empire, and even into the era of the Book of Boba Fett. The Force tears families, planets, and orders apart. Bane only updates his client list. Yet even a man who cares for nothing must eventually choose where to stand. The moment that line is finally tested, and who stands across from him when it happens, is where this quiet shadow in the galactic record steps into open daylight. Before the legend, a young Duros. With a gun in a galaxy that worships destiny, some lives begin in places that teach the opposite. On Duro, there are no prophecies, only contracts. The story of Cad Bane starts here, among orbital shipyards and poisoned skies, where the only real force is industrial gravity, pulling everything down. Long before the Clone Wars, the Duros homeworld had already been carved into lanes and ledgers. Its people were renowned pilots and navigators sold across the galaxy to move goods for corporations, Hutts, and anyone with credits. What followed was a quiet economic conquest. Families displaced from ancestral cities into crowded stations and export towns, where childhood meant learning star charts and debt schedules in the same breath. In that environment, a young Duros would learn early that survival is transactional, that mercy is a luxury someone else pays for around the outer edge of Republic attention. This early galactic underworld was taking shape. Hutt space tightened its grip on the major spice routes from Kessel to Nalhuta. Syndicates moved slaves' weapons and illegal tech, while on Coruscant, the Senate debated tariffs and trade law. Far from those debates, in the shadow of cartel palaces, law became a commodity. Those with power could purchase protection. Those without became examples. This imbalance would shape an entire generation of hired gun smugglers and hunters, who understood that in the dark between hyperlanes, there was no light side or dark side, only risk and reward. For a Duros child gifted with reflexes and a calm hand, the path forward narrowed into something brutally logical. Piloting paid well, but obedience paid better. Bounty hunting offered both an excuse to fly and a reason to never ask questions. Contracts did not care about ideology. They only specified targets, locations, and acceptable levels of collateral damage over time. Cad Bane's name began to circulate in backrooms and encrypted channels, a newcomer who delivered bodies and data with the same unremarkable precision. Even in these early jobs, the traits that would later terrify Jedi were already present. There were no grand speeches, no threats drawn out for effect, merely a blaster raised a shot, fired, and a clean exit, while other hunters postured. Bane conserved words and movement. Witnesses remembered the hat, the tubes, the unblinking red eyes more than any statement he made credits. Transferred a client, nodded a door closed. That was the entire philosophy. Somewhere in this ascent, the scale of his world expanded when Cad Bane crossed paths with a man in Mandalorian armor. What they found there would change everything. Jango Fett represented an older lineage of professional violence, a code built not on honor, in the heroic sense, but on efficiency, discipline, and preparation under Jango's quiet mentorship. Bane's instincts were refined into doctrine, target analysis, contingency planning, psychological pressure applied with surgical timing. For the next 1,000 years, the Jedi and Sith would shape galactic history through war and prophecy. But in this small exchange between two guns for hire, another tradition crystallized, a lineage of apathy armed and armored. The next time Cad Bane took a contract, he was no longer just a Duros with a gun. He was an heir to a methodology waiting for a galaxy about to tear itself apart. Jango Fett's shadow, learning from the best. Armed and armored, the next logical question became simple. Where had Cad Bane learned to turn violence into procedure? The answer was Jango Fett. In the final years of the Republic, Jango stood as the template bounty hunter of his age Mandalorian armor, scarred by a lifetime of conflict twin. Westar blasters, drawn with inhuman precision, and a reputation that reached from the core worlds to the outer rim. He was not only the most feared gun for hire in the galaxy, he was the genetic source of the clone army, the silent father of an entire war. Around this time, the story of Cad Bane's rise intersected with Jango's orbit through shared contracts and underworld recommendations. Bane came under Jango's informal tutelage, not as an adopted son, but as a useful apprentice. A Duros with talent and no illusions, Over time, the two operated together on high-risk jobs for crime lords and separatist backers. Canon sources would later remember this connection as a key influence on Bane's style. A passing mention that explained why a non-Mandalorian moved with Mandalorian precision on these missions Jango taught by demonstration preparation was everything especially against Jedi and Sith long before Bane infiltrated the Jedi Temple or faced Anakin Skywalker. Across a battlefield, he had watched Jango plan for Force users with almost ritual focus, flame projectors to break concentration cable launchers, to limit movement, jetpacks to control distance and angle. This was not bravado, it was math. Gadgets over brute force tools, over ego, survival, over pride. The pattern interrupt came in what Jango did not teach. There was no creed, no talk of Mandalorian honor or ancient clans, only contracts and contingencies in a galaxy obsessed with the Force and grand narratives. Jango reduced existence to terms and conditions. Get paid, get out live, to take the next job for Cad Bane, already inclined toward apathy. This philosophy would shape everything that followed. If the Jedi embodied the light side and the Sith worshipped the dark side, Bane embraced a third path. Absolute indifference emotionally, the lessons cut even deeper. Jango's detachment, his refusal to bond with anyone, but his cloned heir reinforced Bane's oldest instinct. Caring was a liability. Reputation was not an identity, it was a tool. Something to be weaponized in negotiations and in fear tactics. When Bane later walked into the Galactic Senate Chamber or a Hutt palace, his calm was an echo of Kamino's prime template, a reminder that panic was for clients, not for professionals. Then Kamino burned, Jango fell at Geonosis, and what followed was a vacuum. The Republic plunged into war. The clone legions marched under a dead man's face, and in the shadows, Cad Bane stepped forward. He inherited the role Jango had defined the galaxy's top bounty hunter, but without any Mandalorian culture or creed behind it. Only the methodology remained, a cold armor of habits wrapped around a Duro gunslinger, ready to sell his skills to anyone as the clone. Wars escalated. That absence of belief would become his greatest weapon. Top of the food chain, the rise of a specialist in the quiet before the Clone Wars. The galaxy's shadows were already moving. Power never truly sleeps. It only changes hands, and in the underworld, those hands belong to Hutts and Syndicate bosses. While the Jedi watched the Senate chambers, the real currents of the dark side slipped through back alleys and hyperspace lanes. Around this time, the Hutts were consolidating their criminal empire from Nal Hutta to Tatooine. They brokered truces and betrayals with Black Sun, the Pike Syndicate, and smaller cartels, each vying for control of spice routes and slave lines. The Republic's attention was fixed on trade disputes and separatist rhetoric, which meant its blind spots only widened in those blind spots. Bounty hunters flourished, and among them, Duros began to stand out. Cad Bane's early portfolio was unremarkable on paper: captures, extortion, protection runs, but over time a pattern emerged whenever a job carried a near-certain death rating, whenever other hunters walked away. The contract quietly slid across Bane's table. His response was always the same: a number, a signature, and silence. What followed was consistent, brutal success. He specialized in high-risk captures of crime lords who thought themselves untouchable, precision assassinations carried out in crowded sky lanes or fortified palaces, and retrieval missions in active war zones. Long before the Clone Wars formally erupted, this work would shape his reputation. He became the name spoken in hushed tones when failure was not an option and deniability was priceless. Unlike many hunters, Bane never pledged himself to a banner. He worked for Hutts, for Black Sun lieutenants, for corrupt senators and corporate magnates. Later, he would take contracts from separatist leaders and even the hidden Sith, orchestrating the galactic conflict, but he never joined their causes in council chambers and holocalls. He remained the outsider at the table, had tipped low, red eyes half-lidded, counting the credits while empires dreamed of destiny. This distance from ideology freed him to specialize against any target, including the Jedi, drawing on lessons learned under Jango Fett. He began to invest heavily in gear tailored for impossible odds, twin custom L.30 blaster pistols tuned for rapid, accurate fire, a breathing apparatus and tube system that let him shrug off force chokes and atmospheric traps, rocket boots that turned vertical cityscapes into his hunting grounds, and a growing collection of gadgets, stun cuffs, cortosis wiring, and shock devices, all designed with one question in mind. How does a non-Force user walk away from a confrontation with the Jedi Order? By the eve of the Clone Wars, Cad Bane stood at a crossroads. The criminal underworld had tested him and found a specialist. The coming war would need monsters who could move between Senate halls, Heat palaces, and Sith strongholds without hesitation. As the first battle droids marched and the first clones deployed, Bane's price rose, and so did the moral cost of hiring him. The story of what came next would change everything, because the galaxy was about to discover what happened when that Duro stopped hunting criminals and started hunting for the architects of the war itself. War begins, and Cad Bane cashes. In power changes shape when war begins. But what happens when that power is measured only in credits and corpses? The answer is Cad Bane. At the dawn of the Clone Wars, around 22 years before the Battle of Yavin, the red sands of Geonosis had barely settled when the galaxy crossed a threshold. The first open clash between the Republic and the Confederacy turned a political crisis into total warros of newly revealed clone troopers marched beneath gunship fire, while Jedi ignited blades against endless ranks of battle droids. What followed was the rapid militarization of every corner of galactic life in this new order bounty. Hunters became something else entirely. Governments, corporations, and crime syndicates needed deniable assets. They needed specialists who could move between Senate halls, Hutt palaces, and separatist command ships without leaving a trail in that emerging market. Cad Bane was not simply another gun. He was a premium product. The story of his war years would shape how the underworld interacted with the great powers above it for the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Bane was a precision instrument. The Techno-Union and banking clan funneled credits into quiet operations that could not be traced to their droid armies. Bane extracted, captured scientists from Republic custody, sabotaged supply lanes, and delivered sensitive data from deep inside enemy territory. Each mission was transactional. There was no allegiance to the separatist cause, only a calculation of risk against reward. At the same time, the Hutt Khajidics saw opportunity as trade routes burned and border worlds fell into chaos smuggling. And extortion became even more profitable. Jabba and his rivals needed someone who could enforce their will in a galaxy distracted by open conflict. Bane collected debts from warlords, hijacked military shipments, and eliminated rivals, whether they wore separatist insignia or Republic colors over time. His willingness to work both sides became his greatest asset, and his most unsettling trait. The contrast with the clone troopers was stark bred for loyalty and sacrifice. The clones marched into fire for ideals they had been engineered to believe in their armor, and tactics echoed an ancient martial tradition that the Jedi tried to guide toward the light side. Bane stood outside all of it. He refused to risk himself for anything but profit. There was no banner, no speech, no hidden code beneath the wide-brimmed hat. Just a Duros gunslinger calculating angles of survival, while the rest of the galaxy bled for causes. As the war escalated, the Republic turned ever more desperately to the Jedi to protect its core worlds and its secrets. That dependence created a single point of failure. Somewhere above Coruscant, in the quiet corridors of the Jedi Temple, lay the Order's most sacred knowledge and its most vulnerable children. And what they found there would change everything, because Cad Bane's next contract would send him directly into the heart of that sanctuary, breaking the temple. The Holocron heist power means little if it cannot be protected, and nowhere in the Republic seemed more protected than the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, rising over the galactic capital. Its spires pointed toward the heavens, a serene monument to the light side. Its halls were filled with archives, meditation chambers, and training rooms guarded by knights who trusted the Force and their own discipline to keep danger at bay. This was the last place anyone expected a non-Force sensitive intruder to penetrate. For thousands of years, the temple had stood as a sanctuary, a place where war and conflict were studied. But kept at a distance, even during the Clone Wars, its marble corridors and quiet libraries projected calm authority. Yet that calm hid a simple structural truth. Every fortress has doors and systems and routines, and those could be mapped, exploited, and sold to the highest bidder. The story of Cad Bane's greatest violation of sacred space began, as so many of his jobs did, with a contract in the shadows behind the Republic's public war effort. Darth Sidious required something the Jedi would never willingly surrender. A holocron containing a list of Force-sensitive children scattered across the galaxy. Those names would shape the future of the Sith and the Empire to come for Sidious. This was a step in a long dark design for Bane. It was just another client with the resources to pay his fee. What followed was a methodical, unhurried infiltration. Bane assembled accomplices, a Claudite shapeshifter, a slicer droid, and a web of forged credentials. He studied temple security schedules and access points. Over time, he learned how the Jedi trusted their own senses, how they relied on the Force to warn them of danger. Then he walked straight through the gaps. They did not realize they had disguises, and stolen codes opened the outer doors. Manipulation carried him further. A mind-tricked guard could be fooled by the Force, but an overconfident administrator could be fooled by a uniform and the right clearance symbol. When that failed, Bane fell back on the tools that had kept him alive since the days he trained under Jango Fett: wrist-mounted tech breathing tubes, stun fields, and blasters drawn with impossible speed. Anyone who stood between him and the objective, Jedi or not, became another obstacle to be removed. There was no hatred in him, no thrill at desecrating the Order's heart. His emotional state remained flat-measured professional. He moved through archives and holocron vaults with the same detachment he would bring to robbing a bank or hijacking a freighter. Alarms meant timetable, adjustments, not panic. Even the death of defenders was accounted for in advance, a cost written into the job. In the end, the holocron left the temple in his hands. The list of children now a tool in Sidious's plan to twist the next generation toward the dark side. Bane escaped into Coruscant's endless traffic, vanished into its neon haze, collected his payment, and moved on unaware or unconcerned that this quiet theft would echo through history. The temple would recover, its walls would be repaired, but the damage was already done. And Sidious was not finished with Cad Bane or those children yet. Stealing children for a Sith Lord, Sidious's theft of names was never the end goal. It was only the prelude. The holocron and Kyber memory crystal together formed a map, not to weapons or battle plans, but to cradles across the galaxy. The next request arrived with the same cold precision as any other contract. Take this data, locate the children, bring them in alive. No explanations required in the months that followed. What followed was a quiet campaign of abductions hidden beneath the noise of the Clone Wars. While Jedi and clones fought public battles for the soul of the Republic, a single Duros gunslinger moved through the shadows of its civilian worlds. He landed on remote colonies and crowded ecumenopolises, walked through starports, past parents and guardians, and treated the most sacred bond in the light side as nothing more than a logistical obstacle on Rhodia. A family's evening routine ended with a door hiss and the whisper of a blaster set to stun. Bane stepped through their security field as if it were air, neutralized the adults in seconds, and lifted the Force-sensitive infant from its cot. His movements were efficient, almost bored. This was not the story of a fanatic or a sadist. It was the story of a professional contractor executing a task on Glianselm. He posed as transport crew, accepting a child for off-world relocation, then diverted the shuttle to a hidden rendezvous. Point! The terrified cries echoing in the cargo hold did not change his pace. He catalogued each captive by designation and destination, not by name. The children were not hostages, not even prisoners. They were inventory to be delivered to a Sith Lord whose experiments would shape a darker future for the Galactic Order. The true horror lay in the contrast. These were not enemy soldiers cut down in open conflict, not corrupt officials nor underworld rivals. They were innocents, selected only because the Force stirred faintly within them. Yet Bane's demeanor never shifted. There was no hesitation, no visible disgust, no thrill either. Only an ongoing calculation of risk route and reward over time. This absence of moral weight became its own kind of menace. Meanwhile, the Jedi Order reacted with uncharacteristic panic masters who had debated policy and philosophy for thousands of years, now chased sensor traces and incomplete reports across multiple sectors. Yoda, Anakin Skywalker, and Ahsoka Tano followed. Fragments of the trail from one disturbed family to the next, always a step behind a bounty hunter who cared nothing for the dark side or the light side, and therefore left no ideological pattern. to predict when the Jedi finally disrupted the operation on Mustafar, confronting the facility where the children were held. Barnard read the situation with the same cold clarity he applied to every job the extraction window had closed. The risk now outweighed the remaining payout. He cut his losses, fought his way clear, and escaped into the wider war, not out of guilt for what Sidious intended, nor fear of Sith retribution, but because the contract no longer made sense. And somewhere in the chaos, another employer would be waiting, hostage to credits, the Senate crisis. In the wake of that calculated withdrawal, another contract waited, one that would drag Cad Bane out of the shadows of the underworld and into the heart of galactic power gathers in symbols, and few symbols were stronger than the Senate building on Coruscant. Its gleaming spires and vast rotunda projected order stability, the promise that the Republic and the Jedi could hold back the dark side. But what happens when that symbol becomes just another asset on a job? The answer is the story of the Senate hostage crisis. At this point in Republic history, the Clone War was grinding on, the Jedi were stretched thin. The Senate was paralyzed by fear and factional conflict in that atmosphere. Ziro the Hutt's allies needed leverage. They did not turn to the Sith. They turned to a Duros gunslinger. The contract was simple in wording if not in execution. See senators forced the Republic to release Ziro from prison, walk away with credits alive. It would shape the perception of bounty hunters for thousands of years. Bane's approach to the Senate was not theatrical. It was procedural access codes, bribed officials inside men already in place. By the time alarms sounded, his team had infiltrated security grids, sealed blast doors, and locked down key corridors. What followed was a demonstration of pure professional cruelty. The Senate chamber, a place of debate and law, became a killbox under the aim of his blasters. His entrance into the rotunda cut through the chaos repulsor pods, frozen mid-argument senators staring in disbelief. Bane walked the central platform with the same unhurried stride he used in back-alley cantinas. A guard tried to intervene. Bane did not shout, did not threaten. He drew and fired a single shot. The body fell into the void of the chamber. The echo of the blaster bolt did the talking. That execution was not rage, it was punctuation. Proof that every threat he made was real. From there, the crisis became a negotiation conducted in tones almost bored. While panicked senators whispered and droids enforced, his perimeter Bane opened a channel to Chancellor Palpatine, the most powerful politician in the galaxy. The Duros bounty hunter stated his terms release. Ziro opened a secure corridor for extraction stand down. The clones, his voice never rose. He acknowledged the presence of Jedi in the building and dismissed them as a factor. As long as the deal held, Palpatine played the role of reluctant negotiator. But the outcome had been decided. The Republic complied. Ziro walked free, and Bane monitored each step through carefully arranged relays. Once the contract was fulfilled, there was no speech, no gloating, no declaration of victory. He withdrew his forces with the same precision with which he had arrived. The Senate resumed its sessions, the scars hidden beneath protocol and procedure. Over time, this incident would haunt security briefings and Jedi councils, a reminder that one paid killer had turned the Republic's own heart into a bargaining chip. And as the war deepened, another commission waited, one that would pull Bane even closer to the Jedi themselves and to a different kind of target altogether. Jedi as obstacles, not enemies, pulled closer to the Jedi. Cad Bane did not discover reverence or fear. He discovered variables. In a war framed as light side against dark side, he stood outside both, watching robed generals and cloaked Sith move pieces across the board, and he priced them the same. Over time, certain Jedi became recurring obstacles in his path. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the patient strategist whose calm masked a relentless pursuit. Anakin Skywalker, the volatile warrior whose temper made him dangerous but predictable. Ahsoka Tano, still young yet already sharp enough to read a bluff. Others passed through as well. Mace Windu, Quinlan Vos, even temple guards, but the pattern remained. For Bane, this was not the story of grand rivals fated to clash. It was a ledger of risks attached to familiar faces. Around the height of the Clone Wars, his methods against them crystallized. Direct confrontation with a Jedi meant engaging a living weapon of the Force. The odds never pleased him. So he favored deception, hostages, and exits mapped 3 steps in advance. When he infiltrated the Jedi Temple to steal the Holocron of Force-sensitive children, he did not stride in as a conqueror. He slipped through security, used a shape-shifting accomplice, and left traps to slow pursuit. The aim was never to defeat the Order in battle. It was to be gone before most of the Council even understood the scale of the breach. What followed was a series of encounters that revealed how little his ego weighed against survival. Cornered by Anakin and Ahsoka on Naboo, he lied about his employers, stalled for time, and feigned cooperation, allowing the Jedi to believe they held the advantage while he studied every corridor and guard rotation. On other occasions, he surrendered his weapons, knelt, and let binders click shut, not as an admission of defeat, but as another form of camouflage. A cell door was simply one more obstacle to be unlocked, one more guard to be manipulated. From the Jedi perspective, the calculus was very different. To them, Cad Bane was a dangerous criminal whose actions threatened the galactic balance, a hired gun willing to steal children for a hidden master steeped in the dark side. Each clash became a moral imperative: apprehend, contain, redeem if possible. Yet Bane did not see moral crusaders bearing down on him. He saw commanders bound by a code, constrained by compassion, by the Senate, by the image of the Order. That predictability was its own kind of power. Over time, he learned their rhythms. Kenobi would negotiate, Skywalker would press, Ahsoka would question and hesitate at key moments. Where the Jedi saw a battlefield, he saw a puzzle whose rules never changed. And in that stability, he thrived, turning their restraint into his shield and their sense of honor into his doorway to escape. But there was one kind of opponent who would not fit this pattern. Not a Jedi, not a Sith, but another hunter. Someone who wore a familiar T-shaped visor, who measured worth not in creeds or codes, but in reputation. That encounter would shape the end of Cad Bane's war against the galaxy in a very different way. The Hutt cartel's favorite problem solver in the shadows between those dueling hunters stood the employers who had quietly funded Cad Bane's rise for years, the Hutt cartel. Power in the galactic underworld did not belong to Jedi or Sith. It belonged to bloated crime lords whose reach stretched from Tatooine's dunes to Coruscant's lower levels. The Hutts ruled not through honor or faith, but through credits, fear, and deniable violence. For that, they needed someone exactly like Cad Bane. Around the height of the Clone Wars, the story of Cad Bane and the Hutts crystallized around a single prisoner, Ziro the Hutt, held in a Republic facility on Coruscant. To the Senate, he was a gangster. To the cartel, he was an embarrassment who knew too much. When negotiation failed, the Hutts turned to Bane. What followed was a methodical assault on the heart of the Republic's political power, a Senate hostage crisis, executed with cold precision. Bane walked senators at blaster point, forced the release of Ziro, and left the Republic humiliated while the Hutts watched from afar and counted their profits. Over time, this relationship deepened but never softened. The Hutts understood that Bane was not a pet enforcer chained to Jabba's dais. He was a contractor, a Duros who treated the cartel as one more client in a galaxy full of clients. That truth became brutally clear when Ziro escaped Hutt custody and fled with incriminating records. The same family that had paid Bane to free their relative now paid him to hunt Ziro down. There was no hesitation, no moral conflict, only a new contract. Tracking Ziro through the underworld, Bane moved through Hutt space as both asset and threat. The cartel respected his efficiency but feared the independence behind it. This was a hunter who could infiltrate Republic prisons, outwit Jedi, and vanish into hyperspace without a trace. If the Hutts ever failed to pay, or dared to betray him, they knew that the next target on his list could easily be a Hutt on a throne instead of a rival in the gutter. That quiet possibility would shape every negotiation. Hutt contracts dragged Bane into some of the darkest work the Clone Wars had to offer. Enforcing slave routes on worlds where the cartel bought and sold sentient lives. intimidating village leaders who resisted Hutt control, carrying out targeted killings of witnesses and rivals. Each task was approached with the same flat professionalism. There was no pretense of the light side, no grand dark side creed, only the arithmetic of risk and reward. Over time, this pattern of shifting loyalties became the core of Bane's galactic legend. He could free a Hutt one month and hunt that same Hutt the next, serve separatist interests one day and Imperial remnants another. The Hutts were only the beginning. The habit he honed in their courts, working for opposing factions without a flicker of emotional conflict, would later extend to the symbols of entire regimes as Republic, Empire, and their enemies rose and fell around him. Prisons, breakouts, and the art of not caring. As those regimes shifted and rebranded their power structures, another constant emerged around Cad Bane, his relationship with captivity. Even when the Republic managed to catch him, the chains never quite seemed to close around his throat. They were delays, not defeats, inconveniences, not indictments of his skill or status in the galactic underworld during the Clone Wars. His arrest on Naboo and subsequent transfer to a Republic prison might have broken a lesser criminal. Instead, Bane treated the entire process as a negotiation. He stalled interrogations with false leads, forced the Jedi and Republic intelligence into reactive positions, and moved through holding cells and restraints with the same slow, predatory calm that defined his heists. To the guards, he was a prisoner. To Bane, the facility was just another contract environment with different exits to map. One of the clearest examples came when the Jedi staged an undercover operation within the Republic's own detention complex. Obi-Wan Kenobi faked his death, infiltrated the prison, and moved among hardened criminals to uncover a plot. At the center of that web stood Cad Bane, surrounded by killers and conspirators, yet never truly allied with any of them. What followed was a carefully measured collaboration. Bane lent his expertise to the breakout only because it improved his odds of escape, not because he saw comrades around him over time. Patterns emerged in his conduct during these escapes: when a corridor sealed, when a gunship arrived early, when a security override failed, Bane's calculations shifted instantly. If a fellow inmate slowed the group, he was left behind. If a temporary partner hesitated at a junction, Bane chose the route that favored his survival, even if it meant abandoning the plan. The story of his prison arcs is not one of loyalty. Tested, but of loyalty, absent from the beginning. Every relationship remained transactional, down to the last second of the last firefight. This ruthless clarity made even the Republic's most secure facilities appear fragile, their blast doors heavy, their ray shields bright, their guard rotations thorough, yet against a hunter who studied schedules, listened more than he spoke, and treated every wall as a problem to be solved rather than a symbol of authority. They became permeable over time. His escapes would shape the reputation of Republic custody itself. If Cad Bane could not be held, then perhaps no high-value target truly could. In the wider conflict between Jedi and Sith, between Republic and emerging Empire, his indifference to ideology turned each prison break into a quiet demonstration of something older than any creed. The refusal to be owned credits could hire him. Cells could slow him, but nothing could claim him forever. And if metal bars and energy fields could not keep pace with him, then only one warden remained, that even Cad Bane could not outdraw the slow closing hand of time itself, waiting just beyond his next escape. The quiet years, between wars and empires. Time moves forward, but for those who live by the blaster, the years often change less than the uniforms around them. As the Clone Wars burned out, the galaxy staggered into a new order. The Jedi fell, the Senate reshaped itself, and the Republic placed its throat in the hands of a single man. The answer was the Empire. At the end of that war, Order 66 tore through the Jedi Order. In a single orchestrated heartbeat, clone legions turned their rifles on their former generals, temple spires on Coruscant burned, and the guardians of the light side were reduced to scattered fugitives in the shadows of their own galactic capital. What followed was the quiet roar of authoritarianism as Sheev Palpatine cast aside the mask of Chancellor and crowned himself Emperor. In this storm of banners and proclamations, the historical record grows thin around Cad Bane. There are few explicit chronicles of his contracts in these first Imperial years, yet the story of power in transition always follows the same pattern. Regimes change, but those willing to kill for credits rarely struggle to find work, and no one doubted that a hunter of his caliber could name his price. The new empire needed deniable assets, as surviving Jedi slipped through the cracks of clone battalions and early inquisitors. There would have been bounties posted in sealed channels. Former generals, former peacekeepers, now branded traitors to the new order Bane had already infiltrated, the Jedi Temple. For Darth Sidious had already stolen a holocron of Force-sensitive children without a flicker of hesitation. The leap from kidnapping for a Sith Lord to hunting fugitives of the same order required no moral adjustment, only a new contract number beyond the core. The chaos ran deeper. Outer rim sectors that had profited from war suddenly found themselves under distant Imperial decrees. Smugglers' huts and local warlords all needed enforcers to navigate the new hierarchy. 1 month, a Hutt Khajidish might pay Bane to disappear a rival who had pledged loyalty to Imperial governors. The next, a frightened mining guild might quietly hire him to remove a corrupt Moff's favorite overseer. The insignias on the doors changed. The targets still bled over time. Crime syndicates, such as the Pikes and Black Sun, would shape their empires around Imperial trade lanes, bribing officers on some worlds, resisting them on others. A freelancer who owed no flag and no creed was invaluable in this shifting balance. The Force tilted between dark and light, but Cad Bane remained outside that ancient conflict. No Sith, no Jedi, just contracts to him. The rise of the Empire was not a moral catastrophe, it was an accounting opportunity. New laws meant new outlaws, new deserters meant new marks. Someone paid, someone vanished. The rest was ceremony and marching music. Years later, when the clone troopers had aged into relics and conscripted stormtroopers marched in their place, an older Cad Bane would step out of the shadows again, crossing paths with a defective clone squad known as Clone Force 99. The Bad Batch, the galaxy, had changed its face once more. But the Duros gunslinger behind the brim of that hat had not, aging, not softening. Cad Bane, in the Bad Batch, power fades for most beings with age. But what happens when a life built entirely on violence reaches its twilight? The answer is not redemption. In Cad Bane's case, it is refinement in the immediate aftermath of the Clone Wars. The Republic vanished almost overnight. The new galactic empire rose in its place, cold, efficient, and hungry for control. Clone armies that had once fought under the banner of the light side were now rebranded as instruments of Imperial order. And over time, even those clones began to be phased out, replaced by conscripted soldiers and new training regimes. This was a moment of identity crisis for the galaxy itself, and what followed was a slow tightening of the Imperial fist on every world that mattered into this shifting landscape. Stepped Cad Bane, older but unmistakable. The broad hat, the red eyes, the unhurried confidence his face showed the passage of years' sharper lines across blue skin, and a certain heaviness in his movements. His draw might have been a fraction slower, yet his body had been upgraded for survival. Heavy, reinforced boots, armored bracers, and most striking of all, the new cybernetic breathing gear that framed his jaw and skull, a permanent reminder that he had stared death in the face and chosen augmentation over surrender. This equipment was not vanity. It was doctrine. Bane's doctrine. Every tool on his belt had been tuned for the same purpose. It always had. Been outshoot. The target, outthink. The opposition, outlast the war. While Jedi and Sith debated the will of the Force Bane invested in hardware, the Empire would shape galactic history for thousands of years. But for the Duros gunslinger, it was simply another employer, another set of contracts to fulfill. One of those contracts centered on Omega, a child cloned on Kamino with rare genetic value in an age when the Kaminoan facilities were being seized and dismantled. Omega represented leverage, data, and profit. When Bane was hired to retrieve her, there was no moral calculation, no hesitation in the chaos on Bracca. He faced Clone Force 99, confronted Hunter at close range, and shot him down without ceremony, then dragged a terrified Omega away to his ship as though she were a stolen crate. This was the story of a man for whom sentience never outweighed the bounty puck. Decades earlier, he had infiltrated the Jedi Temple itself to help Darth Sidious target Force-sensitive children. What they found there would change everything for those young lives, but not for him. Now with Omega, nothing had softened, no perspective had shifted. A child was still an asset, nothing more, while clones wrestled with purpose under the new empire. Bane's inner world remained a flat, cold line. No crisis, no doubt only work, and the next job would prove that even more brutally, Omega, Camino, and the price of a life in the shadow of the new empire. One forgotten structure drifted above Camino, a dead Caminoan testing facility, abandoned by its creators, but not by those who still saw value in its secrets. It was here that the story of Omega and Cad Bane briefly intersected, and what followed was a quiet lesson in the price of a single life. Brought in wounded and disoriented, Omega found herself alone with Bane and his droid in sterile, empty corridors where the reign of Camino could no longer be heard for her. This was a place of fear and confusion. Every question she asked reached for connection who had hired Bane. Why was she important? Whether there was any chance of mercy? The answers came back flat. He spoke of her only as property, a high-value asset to be delivered to Kaminoan clients in exchange for credits. Nothing more. Around this moment, the contrast between hunter and target became almost clinical. Omega's voice carried panic and empathy. Even for the droid that guarded her, she tried to understand motives to appeal to some hidden spark of the light side in the Duros gunslinger, but there was none. Bane's gaze remained level, his tone steady. He did not threaten for pleasure. He did not reassure out of kindness. He outlined the transaction and the consequences of escape, with the same calm used to check a blaster's charge when Fennec Shand entered the scene. The dynamic shifted, but only slightly. Two bounty hunters met in the dark of that drifting ruin, not as allies or enemies in any grand galactic conflict, but as competing contractors. Fennec moved with a different energy. She showed flashes of concern for Omega, warning her, steering her away from Kaminoan control. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history in subtle ways, yet for Bane it was irrelevant to her. Interference was simply an obstacle between him and payment. Their duel through collapsing platforms and flickering Kaminoan labs was precise and brutal, yet strangely impersonal. There was no vendetta, no Sith or Jedi ideology at stake, only overlapping contracts clashing in confined space. Bane used flamethrowers, cables, and explosives with the same ruthless efficiency that had once broken into the Jedi Temple. Fennec countered with agility and a willingness to risk herself for the child. Each move underscored the gulf between a conscience that could bend and one that had long since calcified when Omega finally slipped away, aided by Fennec and her own quick thinking. Bane's response revealed everything about his inner world. There was no vow of revenge, no obsessive promise to hunt her across the stars, only a snarl of frustration, a tally of lost credits and damaged equipment over time. This pattern would shape every encounter he had with the changing Empire. Secrets about cloning, about the Force, about the future of the galactic order swirled around him. And still he did not care, only the next job mattered. And on the horizon, another contract was already waiting, one that would bring an old name back into his sights. Tools of indifference, Bane's gear, and tactics on the horizon. That contract approached in the shape of a shadow before any blaster was drawn, before any target knew a name. There was only an outline against the light, a wide-brimmed hat cutting a perfect circle through smoke, a long coat hanging straight and heavy, and beneath the brim, two red eyes burning cold in the dark. This was not the silhouette of a hero or a warlord. It was a warning sign that walked in crowded Coruscant corridors or under the harsh suns of Tatooine. That same image repeated, the hat casting his face into permanent dusk, the coat swallowing his movements until the moment he chose to strike metal. Breathing tubes framed his jaw, hissing softly with every measured inhale they gave him. Presence and almost mechanical rhythm, as if the Force itself could not quite reach him under all that hardware. To many Jedi, this was the story of an absence. The absence of passion, of fear, of anything that could be turned against him. The tools hidden beneath that coat were not trophies. They were arguments against chance. Twin L30 blaster pistols rode low on his hips, quick-draw weapons tuned for precision over spectacle. Their blue-white bolts snapped out in tight, controlled bursts. Never wasted each shot, a line drawn between cost and reward. Mounted to his gauntlets, compact flamethrowers spat sheets of fire in narrow corridors, turning retreats into traps and cover into coffins. His boots concealed micro-rockets that could hurl him upward through shafts across alleys or straight out of a collapsing battlefield where others trusted the force or blind courage to carry them. He trusted altitude and escape velocity. Grappling cables and stun cords nested along his arms and belt, ready to bind. Jedi wrists, or yank a fleeing senator off balance in a single motion. Even his breathing gear was more than life support. It was a deliberate barrier against force chokes and atmospheric tricks. A quiet declaration that no unseen hand would close on his throat. Preparation over passion, contingency over courage. This was his creed. Every gadget answered a question asked long before any given job began. How to face a Jedi without a lightsaber. How to walk into a galactic war without choosing a side. What followed was a lifetime of refinements. Each failure filed away. Each narrow escape converted into a new attachment. New armor, new distance between himself and the dark side. Or the light side on Kaminoan walkways under Kamino's storm-choked sky. He advanced on young Boba Fett with the same unhurried steps that had carried him through Republic prison blocks and Hutt palaces. He did not rush. He did not posture. Every corridor became a geometry problem, every rooftop a map of firing lanes and exits. When the Jedi came, he did not duel for honor. He redirected, fire collapsed, structures, cut power, and vanished. The battle was never about glory. It was about leaving over time. This external armor hardened into something internal. Just as his tubes and plates dulled the reach of the Force, his refusal to care dulled every attempt at leverage. Guilt could not catch. A man who never looked back. Manipulation could not move someone who recognized only contracts for the next 1,000 years. Tales of Sith and Jedi would shape galactic history. Yet in the margins, hunters in wide-brimmed hats would keep walking forward untouched by cause or creed. And for Cad Bane, the next job was already loading into his holsters. The underworld's architecture, cantinas, safe houses, and silent deals for Cad Bane. The next job rarely began with a firefight. It began with a doorway, a threshold between the ordered galaxy above and the quiet machinery of the underworld below on Nar Shaddaa. Those thresholds were cantina doors breathing out stale air and dim orange light into endless neon rain. Beyond them, the story of power was told in whispers, not proclamations inside the typical Nar Shaddaa den. The light sat low and heavy filters fought a losing war against curling smoke. The hum of repulsor lifts outside seeped through thin walls, a constant, distant growl that never fully faded. The clink of credits on metal tables cut through the murmur of alien voices, Rhodian clicks, Huttese drawls, and the wet consonants of species that preferred not to be named occasionally. A glass shattered, but the room never rose above a low, steady rumble. Then the doors slid open and conversation stopped, not in panic, but in calculation. Cad Bane's silhouette, wide-brimmed hat, breathing tubes, and long coat was enough to pause negotiations mid-sentence. The band missed a beat. The sabacc tables froze for a heartbeat, and what followed was a subtle shifting of posture. Chairs angled away. Hands moved casually closer to holsters. Eyes pretended not to stare. Every regular knew that a single trigger pull from that Duros could rearrange the balance of power at their table. Over time, the underworld built its own architecture around figures such as Bane on Coruscant's lower levels. Smoky backrooms sat behind respectable facades, noodle shops, repair stalls, even small shrines to the light side of the Force. A sliding panel, a coded knock, and the atmosphere changed. The air turned thicker, the lighting colder. The tables bolted to the floor for when arguments became conflict here. Jedi informants, Hutt enforcers, and freelance hunters all shared the same stale air and the same unspoken rules. These rooms functioned as neutral ground, not through honor, but through mutually assured inconvenience. Killing a contact here meant losing a corridor of information across half the galactic rim. A Hutt lieutenant might sit 3 seats from a Republic bureaucrat, in plain clothes between them a slicer, traded data on Sith movements and pirate raids. No one raised banners. No one spoke of war, only of percentages, timetables and extraction routes in dusty outer rim outposts. The architecture grew even simpler. One-room cantinas with warped transparent steel windows and sand piled against the threshold. The wind outside howled. The repulsor lifts of incoming freighters rattled loose fixtures inside only the steady rhythm of credits on Durasteel, and the faint buzz of faulty power couplings marked the passage of time. When Bane stepped through those doors, the same ritual repeated conversations, thinned eyes, measured distance and cover. Exit paths were recalculated in silence. Cad Bane did not command these spaces, yet he remained their gravitational center. Patrons orbited him carefully, never too close, never too far. Every quiet booth, every shadowed corner, hid contracts that would shape lives and end them. What they found, they would change everything for someone somewhere. Even if Bane himself barely remembered the names by morning, the next section of his history would not be written in grand battles, but in these rooms where the galaxy's fate was quietly bought and sold. No crew, no cause. How Cad Bane stays alone in those rooms where the galaxy's fate was quietly bought and sold. One detail stood out. Cad Bane always sat. Alone power in the underworld often came from entourages, syndicates and clans. But what happens when a hunter rejects all of that? The answer is the story of a man who trusts only his own aim and the credits in his account. Over time, a few figures did orbit his world. Most often, there was To-Do 360, the chattering techno-service droid who handled locks, bombs and complaints. There were occasional partners or a Sing on a sniper's perch, Embo covering a flank, even young Boba Fett trailing in his shadow for a time. But these were arrangements of utility, not affection. Each presence solved a problem, opened a door or drew enemy fire and nothing more. Throughout galactic history, bounty hunters have banded together into guilds and families. The Mandalorians forged whole cultures around shared armor and creed. Hutt Khajidics built sprawling networks of enforcers and smugglers. Even fringe operators tended to cluster for safety in numbers. Bane moved in the opposite direction. He refused to found a permanent crew or carve out a stable corner of an empire. He was a blade for hire, not a banner. This preference shaped every operation. When the Senate was taken hostage on Coruscant, Bane fronted the job. But the muscle behind him was temporary hired guns with no expectation of future loyalty. When the mission ended, those names scattered into the noise of galactic conflict. The only constant was the Duros in the wide-brimmed hat, already listening for the next contract. What followed was a pattern as precise as his draw. Whenever a plan soured, subordinates became expendable during the heist on the Jedi Temple. The risk fell on clones and droids, while Bane slipped away through maintenance shafts when Hutt schemes collapsed or separatist plots unraveled. He abandoned allies on burning landing pads and in collapsing corridors. Without a backward glance, people were tools. Plans were shields, and both could be discarded the moment they stopped working. Expectation might suggest that such cold distance would weaken him, yet the opposite was true. By avoiding attachments, he carried no leverage points, no family to threaten, no crew to betray him. This isolation would shape his survival from the Clone Wars into the Age of the Empire, while Jedi fell to the dark side and Sith masters devoured their own apprentices. Cad Bane endured unchanged, unrepentant, yet beneath that ruthless efficiency lay a quiet tragedy. For thousands of years, the galaxy remembered warlords because followers carved their names into monuments. When Bane finally faced Boba Fett in the dust of Tatooine, there was no one in the crowd who truly mourned the outcome. No clan, no guild, no found family waiting in the wings he had outlived. Mentors, rivals, and regimes, but not even this act of mercy would reshape galactic history. His death was a closed account, and the balance read 0. The next part of his journey would not be about who stood beside him, but about what that emptiness allowed him to do. The Boba Fett problem. Pride in a world without fucks. In that emptiness, one name kept circling Cad Bane's orbit, a name that refused to disappear, even as wars ended and empires changed banners. That name was Fett, not the man who had trained him, but the shadow that man left behind. Power passes from one generation to the next, but what happens when that power is distilled in a laboratory and raised to inherit a legend? The answer is Boba Fett, the unaltered clone son of Jango, created on Kamino. As both heir and experiment, he grew up under the weight of a single expectation to carry Jango's armor, his skills, and his fearsome reputation into a new era of galactic conflict. From the moment Jango fell on Geonosis, his legacy. Fractured on one side stood Cad Bane, the Duro's apprentice, who had watched learned and refined Jango's methods into something colder and more efficient. On the other stood Boba Child with the same face, the same genetic potential, and an unspoken claim to the throne of bounty hunting. The story of their connection would shape the underworld far from the eyes of Jedi and Sith during the Clone Wars. This tension moved from theory to practice. Bane crossed paths with the young orphan Boba more than once, sometimes as a rival, sometimes as a reluctant partner in an unfinished arc of that war. Bane took the boy under his wing, assembling a crew of hunters and giving Jango's son a brutal education in the trade, hostage jobs, prison breaks, and precision ambushes. Boba learned that in this world credits decided who lived and who died, and sentiment was a weakness. What followed was a quiet collision of pride. Bane did not train Boba out of compassion. He saw in the clone a test, a living challenge to the idea that Jango's bloodline defined supremacy over time. The lessons grew sharper until training gave way to confrontation. Their final duel in that era ended with blaster smoke and a single enduring mark, Boba's helmet punched by a shot that came within a heartbeat of killing him. The distinctive dent that would follow him for decades was not an accident of war. It was Cad Bane's signature. In most contracts, Bane's motives were simple: profit, survival advantage. Yet in this rivalry, something else crept in, something close to ego. He needed to prove that the true heir to Jango's craft was not a Vat-born son, but the Duros who had already surpassed the master. This was not emotion in the way the dark side understood it. It was status, a question of rank in a profession built on fear and precision. That question never fully answered itself. The Clone Wars ended, the Republic fell, and the Empire rose. But the unresolved shot between teacher and student lingered for the next 1,000 years. In underworld stories, until at last the sands of Tatooine brought two aging gunslingers back into alignment, one wearing the dent, the other carrying the memory of how it got there, and their final accounting had not yet been paid in full. Between legends, surviving the Empire's reign, around 19 years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy shifted from open war to quiet terror. The Clone Wars ended, the banners changed, and the Republic's corpse was dressed in Imperial white and black. For most beings, this was a brutal turning point for Cad Bane. It was just a change in management. The story of his survival in this era is not about loyalty or rebellion. It is about a professional refusing to care over time. The Empire learned to rule through fear. Star systems were pacified by star destroyers and stormtroopers, while the last embers of the Jedi Order were hunted in the shadows. But somewhere between those extremes, a Duros gunslinger kept walking the same path he always had. He had hunted for the Separatists and for the Hutts. In the old days, under Sidious, he had infiltrated the Jedi Temple itself and delivered children to a Sith master, now under the Empire. He simply adjusted his client list. Imperial officers drowning in their own corruption would have found him useful. A moth who needed a rival silenced a governor who wanted a rebel cell erased without official records. A security chief who required deniable assets in the mid-rim. In each case, Cad Bane's question was never about ideology. It was about risk and pay. If the numbers balanced, the job went on the schedule. If not, the Empire could solve its own problems Beyond the formal reach of the Empire, crime lords still ruled entire sectors. Hutts, Black Sun remnants, and new syndicates filled the vacuum. What followed was a black market golden age, and in that shadow economy, Bane's name remained a currency of its own. He would escort spice convoys past Imperial patrols, retrieve stolen weapons from backwater garrisons, or drag debtors out of half-finished rebel safehouses. The growing alliance might have hired him as well. When desperate enough, a stolen codes job here, an extraction there, never framed as a cause, always as a contract. This made Bane almost uniquely suited to the age of Palpatine. While Jedi and Sith framed the galactic conflict as a clash between light side and dark side, he treated the Force as background noise. The Empire was not a destiny to embrace, and the rebellion was not a hope to protect. He was not a rebel. He was not a collaborator. He was a service provider in a time of oppression. In this, he stood in sharp contrast to others, operating under Imperial rule. Smugglers, such as Han Solo, began as self-interested runners, dodging both crime lords and customs agents. But the pressure of the era eventually forced choices. Some turned towards the Alliance, others into full Imperial enforcers believing in the New Order. Cad Bane believed only in the job this act of mercy would reshape galactic history for some characters, but for him, mercy never entered the equation. By the time the original trilogy's events unfolded, he would have been older, slower in theory, more cautious in practice. A ghost moving between worlds, obsessed with symbols. He ignored stormtrooper helmets, rebel insignia, Sith cult emblems. None of it mattered. He still wore the same hat, carried the same pistols, and calculated the same odds. What they found, there would change everything for heroes and villains, but not for him. And somewhere beyond Tatooine's twin suns, his path was already bending toward one last unfinished debt. The long shadow of a Duros gunslinger. Out in the shadowed corners of the Outer Rim, his name traveled faster than his ship stories about Cad Bane, drifted through smoke-filled cantinas and sealed safehouses, told in low voices over bad liquor and better weapons. They were never about causes, they were about results. Impossible jobs, finished clean. Jedi left dead on temple steps, senators humiliated on the galactic stage by a single Duros gunslinger over time. These tales hardened into a kind of underworld scripture. Smugglers on Ord Mantell repeated the story of the Senate hostage crisis, when Bane walked into the heart of the Republic's power and made the entire government kneel for one prisoner. Slicers on Nar Shaddaa whispered about the day he broke into the Jedi Temple itself, stole a holocron of Force-sensitive children, and vanished into Coruscant's lower levels. What followed was not admiration in the heroic sense, but a cold professional awe for younger criminals. Growing up in the ruins of the Clone Wars, his name became a measuring stick of fear. If a Syndicate broker floated a contract and someone muttered that it had already been offered to Cad Bane, the room went quiet. If even he had turned it down, the conclusion was simple. The job was suicide. If he accepted it, every lesser hunter stepped aside knowing that crossing his path meant entering a conflict that ended in seconds. This was the story of a man without banners or ideology, and that absence of belief would shape his legend more than any single duel. He did not swear fealty to Sith or Jedi Republic or Empire credits, defined his loyalties. When he kidnapped Force-sensitive children for Darth Sidious, there was no sermon about the dark side when he worked for the Hutts. There was no pretense of honor. If Cad Bane came through a door, it was because someone somewhere had paid enough. That reputation granted him a quiet power. Few crime lords ever achieved. He did not need to shout or threaten when the wide-brimmed hat appeared in a doorway. Arguments ended, blasters lowered, and debtors suddenly remembered urgent business elsewhere. More than one gang war on Coruscant's mid-levels ended before the first shot, because both sides realized the same thing. The Duros in the hat was standing between them and the exit. Yet even legends cast long shadows they cannot control. As the Republic fell and a new empire rose, his myth persisted for thousands of years in underworld memory, only in hushed exaggeration, but the galaxy itself moved on. New names gathered gravity, among them a familiar armor and a familiar creed. Boba Fett stepped from the role of hunter to would-be daimyo on Tatooine's sands, and what they found there would change everything when the old Duros shadow finally stretched across the throne of Jabba the Hutt. A new age on old sand. Enter the Book of Boba Fett. In the quiet, after an empire falls, power does not disappear. It pools in the cracks and waits for someone ruthless or desperate enough to claim it on Tatooine. The death of Jabba the Hutt left more than an empty throne. It tore a hole in the underworld's food chain. And what followed was a slow scrambling of gangs, cartels, and syndicates, all reaching for the same prize in the years after Endor. The wider galactic conflict between remnants of the Empire and the rising New Republic barely touched these sands. The twin suns still burned the same. The moisture farms still clung to survival. But in Mos Espa and Mos Eisley, new banners rose over old streets without Jabba's iron grip. His former lieutenants fought among themselves. The Nikto and Klatooinian enforcers splintered, and the Pike Syndicate saw an opening to flood the planet with spice. Under the cover of chaos. Into this vacuum stepped Boba Fett, a name that for thousands of years would not echo through the Force, yet in this era carried its own gravity among hunters, smugglers, and killers. The story of Boba had always been one of cold efficiency, a faceless weapon rented by the highest bidder. But now he attempted something more difficult than any bounty he tried to rule. Boba's rule did not mirror Jabba's. He did not chain dancers to the throne or feed rivals to a rancor for sport. Instead, he walked the streets in armor rather than hiding behind them. He offered terms to enemies and asked for tribute rather than blind obedience. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history only in small ways, but on Tatooine it mattered. He sought to blend fear with respect and a measured restraint that many mistook for weakness over time. This different code threatened interests that had profited from Jabba's brutality. Most of all, the Pikes. They preferred simple arrangements: pay, protection, money, move spice, unhindered, and let terror do the rest. Boba's insistence on taxing their routes, limiting their operations, and protecting civilians in his territory cut directly into their profits in their calculus. This was not honor. It was interference beyond the city walls. The atmosphere of Tatooine reflected this tension. The twin suns watched as biker gangs raided homesteads. Tusken tribes vanished under mysterious assaults, and former Imperial officers sold their skills to whichever syndicate paid in advance. Old legends, whispered in cantinas, were dragged back into the light for one more confrontation. Some spoke of Jedi wandering the desert, others of Mandalorians hunting relics of a dead empire faced with a daimyo who refused to play by the old rules. The Pike Syndicate turned to what they trusted most: hardened professionals, unburdened by conscience. They needed a weapon that understood Fett's armor, his tactics, his stubbornness. Who better than someone trained by Jango himself? When the contract went out, it did not seek a Sith or a Jedi. It sought a Duros whose name had haunted bounty pucks since the Clone Wars, a gunslinger who had outlived empires and still gave nothing away. Cad Bane was walking back into the story. Blue skin in the dunes. Cad Bane returns. Power reveals itself in small, quiet moments. Long before the shooting starts on Tatooine's open flats, the truth walked in on 2 boots and a trail of dust. The story of Cad Bane's return did not begin with a charge or a roar. It began with a shimmer on the horizon in the outskirts of Freetown. The heat rose in waves from the dunes. At first, there was only a distant silhouette, a narrow figure cut out of the glare, each step slow, deliberate, unhurried, as if the galactic conflict between syndicates and marshals meant nothing. The wide brim of his hat arrived before his face, casting his eyes in shadow. The coat moved in the wind, the spurs whispered in the sand, and what followed was a lesson in controlled menace. Around this moment in the New Republic era, many expected blasters drawn and tempers flaring. Instead, the Duros gunslinger stood at the edge of town and spoke. His voice was calm, measured, almost weary. He addressed Cobb Vanth and the gathered townsfolk with the same indifferent tone. Once given to senators, Jedi, and Hutts, there was no threat in his posture, only in his certainty. He offered terms on behalf of the Pike Syndicate, a warning to stay out of the coming war. His words carried the weight of a man who had outlived an empire and watched the dark side and light side trade victories without ever choosing a side. The escalation came not through anger, but through absence of emotion. When Vanth hesitated, Bane did not argue. He did not shout. He simply adjusted the brim of his hat, shifted his stance, and allowed the standoff to harden in the dust. Then, in a single heartbeat, blue skin flashed against brown sky. His hands moved once, and the desert answered. Cobb Vanth fell. The deputy fell harder. The shots were precise, efficient, 2 clean strikes, center mass, and a merciless follow-up. There was no flourish, no gloating, no concern for local politics or morality. This was the same hunter who had walked through Clone Wars battlefields, kidnapped 4 sensitive children for a Sith Lord, and held the Republic Senate hostage over time. His methods had not softened. They had sharpened age, had carved lines into his face. His voice had deepened, but the core remained unchanged. Cad Bane now served the Pike Syndicate with no more loyalty than he had ever given the Hutts or Darth Sidious credits. Replaced banners, employers replaced empires for thousands of years, the galaxies. Great powers would rise and fall. Yet figures like Bane persisted, untouched by ideology. As Freetown's dust settled, it became clear that while Republic Empire and New Republic had cycled into the archives of history, Cad Bane himself had not changed at all, and the next name on his list would shape everything that followed. Face to face with the past, Bane versus Boba, again in the quiet that followed Freetown's last blaster shots. Another conflict stirred one far older than the Pikes or the latest Syndicate dispute. This was the story of a legacy passed down in armor and blood, and of 2 men who believed they understood what that legacy truly meant when Cad Bane finally stood face to face with Boba Fett on the sands outside Mos Espa. It was not a new rivalry beginning, but an old one, resurfacing from their first direct confrontation in the series. Bane wasted no time cutting into the past. He walked toward Boba with the slow certainty of a veteran gunslinger and stripped away the Simoth trappings of daimyo robes and loyal allies with a few sentences. He spoke Jango Fett's name, not with reverence but with possession. He reminded Boba that he had known Jango trained under him, learned the trade at his side. Bane framed himself as the one who had kept Jango's lessons pure, while Boba had diluted them with mercy and negotiation. In Bane's telling, Jango's true heir was not the cloned son trying to rule a territory. It was the Duros who never stopped treating the galaxy as a contract sheet. He called out Boba's attempt to rule with respect, questioned his reliance on allies, and accused him of going soft over time. The subtext was simple. Jango had been a weapon, and Cad Bane claimed to be the sharpened edge that remained unbroken by attachment or community. What followed was a quiet, psychological assault. Bane circled Boba, not only physically, but emotionally. He pushed at every exposed memory, the child on Kamino, the orphan on Geonosis, the hunter who had once stood among the worst of the galactic underworld. Bane framed the light side of Boba's recent choices as weakness, insisting that caring about Tatooine, its people, or his found family would only get him killed in Bane's mind. The only real power came from cutting every tie that might slow the trigger finger. Beneath the taunts lay a generational challenge, an older breed of bounty hunter refusing to yield to a new code. Bane represented the era of the Clone Wars, when the Republic and the Sith-backed separatists both paid well, and nothing beyond the next job mattered. Boba now stood for something messier, a hunter who had survived empire and war and chosen to build instead of merely destroy. It was an inversion of the usual galactic pattern. The man who never cared about anything mocked the one who had finally chosen to care. Their eventual duel was already taking shape long before the first shot. In that moment, the stage was set for more than a personal reckoning. It would pit pure, unfeeling professionalism against a complicated, humanized code, and what they found there would change everything for both men. The outcome would shape how Jango's legacy was remembered, and this act of mercy would reshape galactic history in ways neither hunter fully understood yet. The final standoff. A heartbeat in the sand power changes men, but what happens when one man refuses to change at all, even as the sands around him shift? The answer is written in the dust of Mos Espa on the night Cad Bane faced Boba Fett. For the last time, in the fading light of that battle, the town had fallen strangely quiet. Distant blaster fire echoed between low stone buildings, and the air was thick with smoke and drifting sand. What followed was a pause in the wider conflict, a pocket of stillness where two gunslingers stepped out from the chaos and into something older than any galactic war. They began to circle each other, boots grinding into the grit. Every movement measured every breath. A countdown Cad Bane stood exactly as he had for decades, wide-brimmed hat, low over red eyes, coat hanging heavy over holsters. His presence radiated the same cold professional power that had once terrified senators and Jedi alike. Boba faced him armored in Beskar-scarred helmet, hiding a much more complicated man. Their history hung between them, mentor and student turned rivals. The story of a dying era, condensed into two figures in the street. Bane moved first, his draw still impossibly fast. Blaster, clearing leather, before most beings could even register the motion. The first shot slammed into Boba's armor, driving him back into the sandsparks, flared against Beskar as Bane advanced calmly, keeping the distance exactly where his experience gave him the advantage. He taunted as he fired, insisting Boba had gone soft, that ruling a territory had dulled the edge Jango Fett had once sharpened in both of them. In Bane's mind, nothing fundamental had changed for thousands of years. Men with guns decided outcomes, and he was still the fastest. At first, the exchange seemed to prove him right. Boba stumbled, struggled to bring his own blaster to bear, and every time he tried, Bane was already there, cutting off angles, reading tells, exploiting habits learned long ago. Over time, Bane's confidence hardened into open contempt. He believed completely that sentiment, responsibility, and any trace of the light side only made a hunter weak. Then the rhythm broke. Boba stopped reaching for his blaster and drew the Tusken gaffy stick, instead closing the distance in a sudden forward surge. This was no longer a clean, long-range duel. It became brutal, close-quarters combat shaped by nights in the Dune Sea and lessons from a tribe that had given Boba a place in their story. Bane blocked once, twice, but the momentum had shifted. The old Duros had spent a lifetime perfecting one style, and now the terms of the fight were changing faster than he could adapt in that narrow space between them. Boba's strikes hammered through Bane's defenses, each blow a rejection of the solitary creed. Bane lived by Boba, fought not just for himself, but for a community, for a future that was more than credits and fear, and Bane had no answer for that. His worldview was static, his code unbending, and against this new Boba, it finally failed. Cad Bane fell back into the sand chest, heaving the gaffy blade, driven home. A small device on his chest blinked with a cold blue light, its purpose unclear, its signal unanswered. The camera lingered on that pulsing glow, refusing to explain whether this was an end or merely an interval. And as the dust settled around his body, the question remained, had the galaxy truly seen the last of Cad Bane? Or was this only the calm before something darker returned? Did Cad Bane ever care about anything? Beneath that unanswered signal and the stillness of the desert, another question lingered in the silence. It was not about survival or return, but something far more elusive in a galaxy defined by passion and ideology. What does it mean when a figure appears to feel nothing? The story of Cad Bane is not driven by the light side or the dark side. It is driven by an absence from his earliest appearances in galactic history. Bane moved through conflict without the emotional turbulence that shaped Sith and Jedi alike. When ordered to infiltrate the Jedi Temple and steal the Holocron of Force-sensitive children, he did not hesitate. There was no visible struggle when he kidnapped those infants. For Darth Sidious, no flicker of doubt when he threatened their lives to ensure his escape. What followed was a sequence of cold calculations, each step measured only in terms of risk and reward. During the Senate hostage crisis on Coruscant, Bane held politicians and guards at blaster point and executed hostages to prove his seriousness. Another being might have used intimidation and then flinched at needless death. Bane simply followed the contract. The same pattern repeated in prison breaks and heists across the Clone Wars he betrayed. Allies when credits demanded. It killed guards who were already beaten and walked away from chaos without looking back over time. This consistency became its own kind of horror. If there was any moment that seemed to invite connection, It came with his mentorship of a young Boba Fett, raised in the shadow of Jango's armor. Boba carried anger and grief, where Bane carried calculation. Their unfinished duel arc in the Clone Wars hinted at a bond of convenience. Bane taught him aim tactics and the unwritten rules of the underworld. But even there, his guidance was framed in terms of power, reputation, and survival, not affection. He wanted Boba sharp, not safe, a rival in the making, rather than a student to protect his partnership with the droid. Todo 360 offered another faint suggestion of companionship. Todo complained, joked, and sought acknowledgement. Bane tolerated him, repaired him when useful, and then casually sent him into lethal situations when the mission required sacrifice. Todo was expendable. The Duros gunslinger never paused to mourn a destroyed assistant. He simply ordered a rebuild or moved on to the next tool. In the end, the only enduring attachment Cad Bane ever displayed was to his own legend, his insistence on being the best shot in the room. His refusal to age gracefully or yield the field to younger hunters would shape every late appearance, from facing the Bad Batch to confronting Boba on Tatooine. What they found, they would change everything, not for him, but for those who realized he could not be bargained with through mercy or fear. In a galaxy where Sith burn with passion and Jedi cling to hope, Cad Bane's near-total emotional vacuum remains both fascinating and quietly terrifying. And yet his trail through history was not finished. More dangerous than Sith, the power of apathy. In that emptiness, another question emerges: if passion drives the Sith and duty chains the Jedi, what happens when a killer is guided by neither? The answer is Cad Bane at his most. Dangerous, more dangerous in certain moments than many Sith Lords, because nothing in him burns hot enough to be exploited. For thousands of years, Sith power has been tied to obsession, hatred, ambition, a need to dominate the galactic stage. This made them terrifying but also strangely predictable. A Sith craves recognition, a throne a rival to destroy their patterns of conflict form. A kind of dark side weather forecast, Sidious engineers, war to seize an empire Maul hunt, Kenobi out of pure hatred, Vader fixates on legacy and bloodline. Even at their most monstrous, they are still tethered to something Cad Bane is not tethered. He hunts for profit alone. This is the story of a man who will kidnap Force-sensitive children for Darth Sidious one year, and then turn around and work for Hutts or shadowy Republic figures the next, without a flicker of internal conflict. There is no grand design, no ideology, no dream of ruling anything beyond the space between his blasters and his target that apathy makes. Him flexible in ways the Sith are not. A Sith agent might hesitate to empower a rival faction or to cooperate with Jedi-aligned interests because it threatens their long game. Bane has no long game beyond staying alive and getting paid. He can walk into the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, infiltrate its archives for a Holocron, then later collaborate with crime lords who fear the very same Sith he once served. What followed was a career defined by crossing every boundary others treated as sacred over time. This leaves a faint footprint in galactic history. Sith empires announce themselves with fleets, super weapons, and temples. Their desire to reshape the galaxy leaves records, monuments, scars. Cad Bane leaves bodies, credits transferred, and silence. He does not seek planets or systems. He seeks contracts. This absence of visible ambition makes him harder to track and even harder to anticipate. There is no territory to map, no manifesto to decode, only a reputation that appears wherever the price is highest. When he steals that holocron and delivers children into Sidious's grasp, he becomes an amplifier of Sith evil without ever joining their creed. He does not meditate on the dark side or invoke ancient rituals. He simply provides the raw material for future atrocities and then walks away, as though he had moved cargo instead of lives. This is enabling on a galactic scale, carried out with the emotional weight of a routine delivery. In the end, a Sith Lord screams about destiny and power. Cad Bane merely asks about the fear Sith can be reasoned with through pride, fear, or ambition. A man who kills for nothing but credits and then sleeps soundly may, in some ways, be far more chilling, and his quiet presence in the shadows of greater conflicts would shape what comes next. the long thread, Cad Bane, across eras in the wider sweep of galactic history. Cad Bane becomes something stranger than a mere hired gun. He becomes a constant line through changing regimes, a cold blue thread running from the twilight of the Republic into the uneasy dawn of the New Republic. While the Jedi and the Sith argue over destiny, this Duros marks time in contracts before the Clone Wars. His name moves through the underworld in hushed, professional tones, trained in part by Jango Fett. He studies not only weapons, but the mindset of a perfect contractor. No cause, no banner, only the job. This is the story of a man who watches the Republic and the Separatists drift toward war, and quietly realizes that what followed was an era of limitless opportunity. During the Clone Wars, that prediction proves accurate. He steals a Jedi Holocron from the heart of the Temple itself, kidnaps Force-sensitive children for Darth Sidious, and turns the Senate building on Coruscant into a hostage theater for the Hutts. He trades blaster fire with Obi-Wan Kenobi duels, Anakin Skywalker outmaneuvers Ahsoka Tano, and yet never once speaks of the Force, the dark side, or the light side. These are simply variables in a contract to be priced and managed after the war ends and the Republic becomes an empire. Cad Bane does not retire. He adapts his targets, but not his principles, over time. Clones become deserters, senators become fugitives, and Jedi become myths, but the same hat, the same pistols, the same cold red eyes move from one bounty puck to the next in the Bad Batch. He confronts Omega with the same unshaken professionalism once reserved for senators and Padawans. To him, the change in government is background noise. This is what makes Cad Bane a living timeline marker in any era. His appearance signals that morality has become negotiable. Survival has become a transaction. When he steps into a scene, the audience knows the story has entered a space where the rules of war and honor fall away, and only leverage, credits, and calculation remain his encounters with the great figures of the age. Trace, the main current of history, without ever pulling him under Obi-Wan, and Anakin meet him at the height of the Clone Wars. Ahsoka crosses his path in the chaos of shifting fronts. Boba Fett grows from resentful child to armored rival under his shadow. Their destinies bend towards Sith Lords, empires, and rebellions. His bends only toward the next feat. By the time of the book of Boba Fett, he walks the sands of Tatooine. As a relic of the old ways, the Empire has fallen. A new republic stumbles toward order, but Cad Bane still offers the same service at the same emotional cost. None his final duel with Boba feels less like a new chapter and more like the last entry in a ledger that has been kept meticulously balanced for decades. And as this long line of jobs is traced across eras, the pace of the story slows, revealing one unbroken trajectory through rising and falling empires. A single gunslinger moving steadily on while the galaxy burns around him. Worlds he touched, lives he altered. Over time, that ledger spread across the map of the galaxy, each entry pinned to a world that would never be quite the same again. Power in it. The Star Wars galaxy is often measured in fleets and superweapons. But what happens when that power is expressed through one unbothered man, stepping off a landing ramp, taking a job, and leaving the scene behind? The answer is the quiet ruin Cad Bane left in his wake. On Coruscant, his trail runs straight through the heart of galactic authority. He walked into the Senate building with hostages and explosives, and walked out with Ziro the Hutt. The polished floors of that chamber once symbolized the Republic's faith in procedure and order. After Bane's siege, what followed was a new understanding that laws and guards meant very little against a professional with no fear and no cause. Later, he breached the Jedi Temple itself, stealing a holocron and the names of Force-sensitive children. The temple had stood for thousands of years as a sanctuary of the light side. Yet one Duros gunslinger proved that even the Jedi could be compromised from the inside. Beyond the core, the story of his influence wanes through dust and rain on Tatooine. His contracts for the Hutts chipped away at any illusion that the desert's crime lords were untouchable. Only from the shadows, each assassination and extraction shifted the balance between families and syndicates. A single duel or dead lieutenant would shape the hierarchy of Mos Espa. And beyond on Camino, His presence in the sterile cloning facilities tied the Republic's Grand Army to the underworld. He turned laboratories into battlegrounds, forcing Kaminoans and troopers to confront the fact that their war was being nudged by interests far outside the official chain of command. The most enduring scars, however, belong to those who never appeared on wanted posters, the Force-sensitive infants taken from distant worlds. For Darth Sidious, left behind parents who never learned what happened to their children. Senators who survived his hostage crises carried the memory of kneeling on cold marble while their colleagues begged for mercy. Local communities, from outer rim mining towns to mid-rim trade ports, felt the shock when a key figure vanished to Bane's blaster, a leader removed, here a negotiator, silenced there, an entire region slid further into conflict. Unlike the Sith or Jedi, Bane never sought to write his name into history, yet his contracts consistently advantaged the Hutts, the Separatists, and the hidden Sith Empire. Every job completed, for Sidious weakened trust in the Republic. Every favor done for the Syndicates entrenched their grip on trade routes and slave lanes. His influence was not carved into monuments, but buried in missing persons, reports, and unmarked graves, while temples and Death Stars rise and fall. The damage inflicted by one calm professional with a blaster continues to echo, and as the timeline of his work stretches toward the age of the Empire, the question becomes, whose design was he truly serving, and how much darker could those ripples still grow? Cad Bane's code rules in a lawless life. His trail of bodies and vanished targets suggests chaos, but beneath the surface, Cad Bane moves according to a rigid internal order. Power in his world is not mystical, not the Force, not the eternal struggle between light side and dark side. It is the quiet certainty that every job has rules and that he will follow his. From his earliest days under Jango Fett's shadow, Bane absorbed a simple creed. Work is a transaction, not a cause. The story of his career can be read as a series of unwavering principles. Always get paid. Never work for free. Credits first. Everything else a distant second. When he infiltrated the Jedi Temple to steal a holocron for Darth Sidious, what followed was not a crisis of conscience but a negotiation over terms. Children, Jedi, Sith, Republic, Empire. None of it mattered as long as the account balanced at the end. Closely tied to this is his near-absolute refusal to break a contract once accepted. In a galactic underworld defined by betrayal, Bane's word functions as a kind of dark mirror to Jedi honor. He will kidnap Force-sensitive children, hold the Senate hostage, or gun down a rival on Tatooine, but he will not casually abandon a client. This is not morality. It is professional superstition, a belief that reputation is armor. Over time, that consistency would shape how Hutts, Separatists, and even Sith Lords calculated risk around him. Another rule sits beneath the brim of his hat: minimize unnecessary risk. Bane does not charge into conflict for glory. He studies floor plans before the Senate heist, rigs escape routes during prison breaks, and enters duels only with gadgets, tech, and contingencies in place. Where some hunters embrace chaos, he treats it as something to be strangled in advance through planning. When plans fail, his improvisation is not wild, it is controlled retreat. This devotion to preparation marks a quiet pattern interrupt in a galaxy obsessed with destiny. While Jedi trust the light side and Sith surrender, to passion, Bane trusts only preparation and payment. His code is narrower than any Mandalorian creed, colder than any Jedi oath, entirely self-serving, yet eerily consistent. A Mandalorian might speak of honor in battle, a Jedi might speak of balance in the Force. Bane speaks in numbers, schedules, and clauses. In the end, this is the structure that lets him sleep. By reducing every situation to rules and transactions, he avoids confronting the human cost of his actions. A dead Padawan is a completed contract. A devastated village is an unfortunate byproduct. The ledger closes, the job ends, and the galaxy moves on. Yet as the Republic falls and a new empire rises, the question becomes, what happens when that cold code finally collides with someone whose rules run just as deep? silence, after the shot. How stories like his end, in the end, that collision does not come with a speech or a revelation. It comes with a single shot in the dust of Tatooine. The story of Cad Bane's ending begins not with a grand duel surrounded by armies, but with two figures in a quiet street, a fading gunslinger and the bounty he helped raise, as Boba Fett's Gader Fi strike sends him crashing to the ground. Bane lies in the sand of a backwater world that has seen more than its share of war. The camera settles on his chest, the familiar breathing device blinking in a slow mechanical rhythm. What followed was not a dramatic pronouncement of death. There is no medic, no confirmation, only the wind, the distant chaos of Mos Espa, and that insistent blue light pulsing against red dust in a galaxy that has watched Sith and Jedi fall from Star Destroyers and Temple spires. This is a different kind of ending. There is no pyre, no state, funeral, no mourning crowd. Bounty hunters do not receive monuments. They simply stop answering calls one day over time. Their frequencies fall silent. Their names drift from active contracts to old stories told in the corners of cantinas. This is how power in the underworld usually fades, not with an explosion, but with unanswered comms. For Cad Bane, that ambiguity fits his history. During the Clone Wars, he escaped Republic prisons, infiltrated the Jedi Temple, and walked out past some of the most powerful Force users in the galactic core. He vanished after jobs that should have killed him, and resurfaced years later on Bracca and Bora Vio, facing new clones and new regimes, as if nothing had changed except the armor and the pay grade. Would it really break history if the Duros in the dust managed one more escape? Some imagine that blinking chest device as a quiet promise, the notion that hidden failsafes or off-screen allies might drag him from the Tatooine sand to some shadowed clinic in Hutt space. If that happened, what they found there would change everything only in the smallest of ways. One more old killer still working the trade, still answering to credits, while new empires rise and fall around him. Yet there is another possibility that feels equally true. That this was simply the moment when a lifetime of gear finally failed, when the hat, the coat, the breathing tubes, and the implants that kept him faster than beings half his age all reached their limit. The blinking light becomes not a signal for rescue, but a last mechanical reflex fading into silence. In either case, the galaxy does what it always does. It moves on, new syndicates form, new wars ignite between light side and dark side champions. New hunters step into the void for thousands of years. This cycle would shape the margins of galactic history, and Cad Bane becomes one more legend mentioned in low voices over cheap drinks, a warning, a boast, a name that once meant certain death, now reduced to a question. Did he die there in the sand, or did he walk away one last time? Why we can't stop watching him, not care in every age of galactic conflict. There are figures who burn with belief, and others who move through the chaos as if it were weather. The Jedi agonize over the light side, the Sith exult in the dark side. But what happens when a gunslinger walks between them, untouched by either? The answer is Cad Bane over time. This becomes the quiet appeal of his presence in the story of the Clone Wars. While generals debate strategy and senators argue policy, Bane strides through the same corridors without visible inner turmoil. He robs the Senate, kidnaps, a chancellor's aide breaks into the Jedi Temple, and his heartbeat never seems to change. In a narrative filled with tortured knights and tragic apprentices, that absence of visible doubt becomes strangely calming. He is a fixed point in a storm. This calm rests on something that feels almost structural. His competence from the early heist on the Senate floor to the escape from the Republic prison barge, Bane demonstrates an unnerving mastery of preparation, contingencies, and timing. What followed was a pattern of ruthless professionalism that begins to feel predictable in its unpredictability. The audience does not know who he will betray or what line he will cross, but there is certainty that he will execute the job with precision. That certainty creates a dark sense of security. Beneath that security lies a fantasy that would shape the way his episodes linger in memory, in a galaxy where most beings are pulled between duty, loyalty, fear, and hope. Bane's single-minded focus on credits and survival can feel darkly liberating. He owes nothing to the Jedi, nothing to the Sith, nothing to the rising Empire. His only creed is the contract in a life defined by competing obligations. The vision of a Duros who simply does not care becomes its own temptation, a portrait of existence without guilt. Yet the same scenes that invite that fantasy also provoke deep discomfort when he infiltrates the Jedi Temple to steal a holocron of Force-sensitive children, then calmly abducts those infants for Darth Sidious. The calm becomes chilling when he holds a blaster on hostages in the Senate or guns down lawmen in cold blood. The viewer is forced to confront the cost of that indifference. The tension between the allure of not caring and the horror of its consequences keeps attention locked on every measured step he takes. Experienced slowly, in a long quiet recounting, the tension becomes safe to examine. The story of Cad Bane can be followed job by job, from a distance, the measured tone. The chronological drift through wars and regimes allows the mind to observe a life lived almost entirely, without conscience, without being consumed by it. And yet, there is one question his indifference has never fully answered, and it waits in the shadows of his final duels, from soft-spoken narration to silent sleep. That question never quite arrives as a sharp revelation. Instead, it stretches out behind him, across decades, a quiet line of motion through a restless galaxy. The story of Cad Bane begins far from any throne room or temple, on the polluted world of Duro, where a thin blue child watched starships rise and vanish into the smog overhead, and understood that the only constant in a galactic age of Republic bureaucracy and underworld chaos would be the price on someone else's head. Over time, that child became a student not of the Jedi or the Sith, but of a single armored warrior, Jango Fett, whose methods would shape an entire generation of bounty hunters. The Duros learned how to read a battlefield before a shot was fired, how to hear the rhythm of a firefight in the clatter of blaster bolts, and most of all, how to keep the heart rate steady when everyone else was shouting and dying when the Clone Wars erupted and the Republic slid into open conflict. What followed was simply more work. Around the height of that war, his path threaded through the brightest corridors of power and the darkest corners of the underworld. He walked calmly into the Senate building with hostages wired to explosives. He slipped through the Jedi Temple to steal a holocron of Force-sensitive children for Darth Sidious he broke prisoners from. Republic cells and delivered captives to Hutt Kajidics. Each mission featured new clients, new codes, new targets, yet the same unhurried stride, the same measured draw, the same indifferent red eyes that did not care whether the credits came from Republic, Separatist, or criminal empire. After the fall of the Republic, when clone troopers repainted their armor and the Imperial crest replaced the old insignia, his silhouette did not change. The galactic order shifted from democracy to tyranny. But for Cad Bane, the transition from Clone Wars to Empire was only another adjustment of routes and contacts. Seen from his perspective, the banners on Star Destroyers were details at the edge of vision, while the center remained a single repeating pattern: arrive, assess, neutralize, get paid, depart. The Force raged in the background as Jedi died and Inquisitors rose, yet he moved through it as if walking through distant thunder. Years later, as an old gunslinger on the sands of Tatooine, facing a grown Boba Fett, under twin suns the line finally curved toward its end. But even then the motion felt familiar. A duel at dusk, a town watching from doorways a heartbeat that did not speed up the history behind them. For thousands of years of Sith and Jedi struggle, narrowed to the distance between two holsters, and for Cad Bane, that distance was the only truth that had ever mattered. Imagine from far above his life becomes a slow tracking shot across a star map, the glow of Coruscant's Ecumenopolis, the neon haze of Nar Shaddaa, the dust of Bracca, and the emptiness between systems all blur into one continuous streak of light. Individual jobs fade into a background hum of contracts fulfilled and promises, broken faces of senators. Jedi clones and criminals drift past without names. The sharp details of each heist and hunt soften at the edges until they resemble a single long night spent moving from one quiet, deadly task to the next. And in that widening blur, his indifference finally begins to feel less like a threat and more like a distant, steady sound that can be followed into sleep. A thread of cold blue through a warm galaxy. Around that distant, steady sound, the rest of the galaxy continues to burn. The Jedi ignite blades of brilliant green and blue. The Sith answer with searing crimson. The clash of the light side and the dark side throws up sparks that streak across galactic history. For thousands of years, hyperspace lanes flare white as fleets rush toward another war. Turbo lasers carve neon scars through the void, and whole worlds flicker under the warm glow of orbital bombardments and desperate shields on the surfaces. Below, cities shimmer in layered gold and amber windows, streets and sky lanes forming rivers of light that never sleep. Suns hang heavy above them in blazing yellow and red, each star a furnace of belief and cause and conflict. Senators argue under bright chandeliers. Clones march through sterile corridors lit in hard white Jedi, meditate in soft blue sanctuaries, while Sith seek and plot in chambers of deep blood red. Every corner of this empire and republic, and every shadow between them pulses with heat, with passion, with stories, demanding to be heard against all of that color. One presence moves as a single line of cold blue. It is the narrow silhouette of a Duros hat brim cutting across the noise coat, trailing in muted shadow. Cad Bane walks through the blazing corridors of Coruscant's Senate hostage crisis, and the light pools around him without ever touching him. He stands in the emerald glow of Jedi Temple halls, while alarms flash scarlet, and what followed was panic, fear and desperate motion. Yet his stride remains the same, unhurried, unbroken, indifferent. He is indifferent to the Jedi. He is indifferent to the Sith. He is indifferent to the Force and to the great ideas that would shape the age. Contracts change, employers change, the flags over Star Destroyers change, but the line of cold blue continues forward. The same boots on different decks, the same measured draw of blasters in different alleys over time. This repetition becomes its own quiet rhythm. Credits offered, credits taken, target acquired, target delivered. No crusade, no redemption, only continuation. Breathe in as the galaxy flares around him. Breathe out as that single color stays steady, while others burn the warm explosions of battles on Ryloth and Felucia. Rise in orange and white clouds, but through them passes the same Duros silhouette, a cooling absence in the middle of fire. In the neon haze of lower Coruscant cantinas, holograms flicker in every shade, yet his eyes remain that flat red, his skin that unfazed blue. He refuses to be drawn into anyone else's story, refuses to bend toward prophecy or destiny or legend over distance. That line begins to thin. Imagine it stretching across starfields, from Duro to Tatooine, from Kamino's stormlit platforms to the sun-bleached streets of Freetown. Imagine it receding each step, farther from the roar of engines and the arguments of Jedi and Sith, until the brim of the hat is no more than a mark between stars, until the coat is a faint stroke of darker night, until Cad Bane is only a cool memory, a quiet legend drifting at the edge of vision. As that image fades, let the breath slow with it in, through the noise of battles, out through the widening distance, in through the heat of causes and crusades, out through the cooling blue that does not care for victory or defeat. For the next 1,000 years, the galaxy will remember empires and orders and chosen ones. But this act of mercy would reshape galactic history in a different way. The mercy of forgetting, of letting sharp stories soften into background stars, until even the most dangerous gunslinger becomes only another calm point of light waiting in the dark. Cad Bane's legacy as a bedtime story. In that quiet, forgetting, another pattern emerges. Power fades, legends blur, but the rhythm of certain lives remains beneath the noise. Almost musical, almost gentle, the story of Cad Bane becomes less. A collection of brutal moments and more. A dark lullaby carried on galactic airwaves long after the blaster smoke has cleared, told from a distance. His worst deeds lose their jagged edges. The kidnapping of Force-sensitive children from remote worlds, the Senate held hostage under the marble arches of Coruscant, the cold negotiations with Hutts and Separatists, and Sith, all of it stops being a series of shocks and instead settles into recurring notes in a familiar song. What followed was never surprise, only confirmation that the same tune would play again. Cad Bane's life becomes a cautionary tale, whispered in low tones about what happens when a single being chooses to care only for themselves. He did not serve the light side or the dark side. He did not bend the knee to Jedi or Sith or Empire. He served the contract and nothing else. In the end, that narrow loyalty stripped him of everything but routine. And yet, from afar, that same ruthless focus becomes strangely soothing because it never changes job plan, execution, escape payment over time. This cycle repeats until it feels inevitable. A quiet orbit around the gravity of credits, from the Jedi Temple heist for Darth Sidious to the prison breaks and Hutt bargains to the late-era clashes on desolate worlds with an aging Boba Fett. The pattern holds. There is always a target, always a calculated approach, always the attempt to walk away unbothered as the galaxy burns around him. Through this timeline, a listener has walked beside him through decades of conflict without needing to share his apathy. The fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, the scattered age of bounty hunters and syndicates all pass in review. Cad Bane crosses paths with Obi-Wan, Anakin, Ahsoka, and later the clones of the Bad Batch, yet remains untouched by their convictions, their doubt, their hope. He is observed, not admired, followed, not forgiven over time. The repetition itself becomes hypnotic. The Duro's gunslinger steps into frame, draws, speaks, or does not speak, and then vanishes again. The details change: the planets, the clients, the uniforms of whatever government claims power, but the core remains untouched. This is the comfort and the warning. His legacy offers stability without compassion, order without mercy. And so the focus drifts from the man to the pattern, from the sharpness of single moments to the soft curve of an entire life in memory. All such stories eventually lose their immediate sting. Even the darkest careers, even the most violent chapters of history become distant constellations, points of reference in a sky that has seen wars, empires, and revolutions come and go. The edges dull, the colors fade, and what they found there would change everything, not through revelation but through quiet perspective, that even the harshest tales can be held gently at arm's length and allowed to rock the mind towards sleep, letting the blaster cool, drifting away from the story over time. Even the sharpest legends begin to soften at the edges. The crack of blaster fire becomes a distant echo. The glare of neon signs fades to a muted glow. In that quiet distance, a different image of Cad Bane begins to form. Not the sudden violence of an ambush or the cold precision of a contract fulfilled, but the moment after, when the blasters are finally set down on a scarred metal table, their barrels cooling the last coils of heat, slipping into the air and disappearing in the low-gravity hush of some forgotten outer rim safehouse. The smell of ozone hangs for a moment, then thins the faint tang of Tibanna gas and scorched circuitry, giving way to something stiller, emptier. It is the end of another job, another pursuit through the shadows of a galactic underworld that has run on conflict and fear for thousands of years. What followed was not triumph or regret, only that familiar silence that always waited. Once the danger passed and the targets were gone far across the lanes of hyperspace, the underworld cantinas begin to close one by one, doors sliding shut over flickering signs as the last patrons drift away. The music cuts out the sabacc tables, fold the droid's power down behind the bar, in places where Jedi once hunted criminals, and Sith once whispered in back rooms. The night finally exhales. The last ships of the cycle lift from their landing pads, thrusters low and steady, rising into a sky that no longer roars with war, but hums with a softer, quiet names that once carried weight in Cad Bane's orbit start to blur. Jango Fett, the mentor whose ruthless efficiency would shape his code. The Hutts, whose credits kept him moving. The Jedi whose narrow escapes added tension to his legend. All of them become distant waypoints along a single continuous line. The story of a Duros gunslinger who crossed empires and eras without ever pledging to the light side or the dark side, until the exact dates and battles no longer matter as much as the feeling of a very long journey beginning to settle, as that journey slows the images of duels and heists loosen their hold. The holocron of his life closes with a soft final click. Its data sealed, its light extinguished, the sensation of chase and impact gives way to something more regular, more dependable. The steady rhythm of breathing, rising and falling in a pattern older than any Sith Empire or Jedi Order. Each exhale taking a little more of the heat from those blasters, each inhale drawing in the calm that waits beyond conflict. Cad Bane's timeline reaches a safe stopping point, not a cliff above chaos but a level plateau, a finished chapter that can be set aside for the next 1,000 years if needed, a closed file in some forgotten archive of bounty hunter history, resting untouched, while the galaxy moves on. Yet even in that stillness, a question lingers at the edge of the dark. What happens when a life built on motion finally has nowhere left to run, and whose shadow steps forward when his finally fades? Closing the holster, a soft farewell and gentle CTA. In the end, the answer to that lingering question is quiet. The shadow that steps forward when his finally fades is not a hero, not a Sith, not a Jedi. It is only the memory of a Duros gunslinger who never truly belonged to any of them. Cad Bane was a child of Duro, but his real home was the open lane between stars. A bounty hunter who walked through galactic history as if it were just another dusty street. Over time, his path ran beside empires and orders that believed themselves eternal. The Republic, the Separatists, the newborn Empire, the crumbling Hutt, Khajidics. Yet Cad Bane never chose a side, never swore a creed, never chased a cause. He learned under Jango Fett that power was a tool and credits were a compass. And what followed was a lifetime of contracts carried out with the same cold precision, whether the client sat on a throne or hid in a back alley in a galaxy ruled by the Force and fire by the dark side and the light side. His refusal to care became its own unsettling gravity, while Sith and Jedi bled for visions of a destiny. This Duros in a wide brim hat walked through their war untouched by its passions he stole from the Jedi Temple. Itself, he served Darth Sidious without devotion. He crossed blaster lines on worlds torn apart by conflict, then left before the smoke had even settled. His indifference would shape the fear that followed his name, because nothing could move him except the job. Over the years, his legend turned into something colder than hatred. Not a monster driven by rage, not a martyr driven by hope, but a professional who treated every life the same, from senators on Coruscant to nameless troopers on forgotten moons. That was the story of Cad Bane, a man who stood at the edge of the great currents of galactic history and never stepped in. Yet even that kind of legend does not last forever. Age crept in the way it always does. His reflexes slowed his enemies, changed. The boy he once tried to mold into a sharper weapon. Boba Fett rose to meet him under twin suns, and what they found there would change everything for him in a single heartbeat. The duel ended. The contract list finally ran out, and his hat fell to the sand. Now the galaxy turns on without him. Indifferent as ever, for thousands of years, hunters, smugglers, Sith and Jedi will rise and fall, their stories threading through the same dark and starlit tapestry. There are other timelines waiting, other empires to crumble, other orders to burn, all told in the same calm, unbroken way. If any eyes remain open, they can let the next story begin, or simply let this one echo softly in the background as rest takes hold. Somewhere beyond the window, the stars keep their distance over a silent desert. A hat lies half buried in the cooling dunes. No footsteps, no engines, no war. Only the slow turning of a galaxy that neither knows nor cares. that one more gunslinger is gone. And as that image fades, the night can finally close its holster and drift into silence.